I'm a 78-year-old father from Asheville. The night my son's plane vanished, my neighbor leaned in and whispered, "Lester, the will Marla keeps waving around, it's fake." My daughter-in-law sat me in the back pew at the memorial and told me to keep quiet, like I'd already died with him. I kept my calm, and a secret. Daryl's real handwriting didn't burn as easily as they hoped. Tonight, I'm walking into a meeting that could bury their lies, or bury me. Stay with me to hear what I brought to court, and what the judge pulled from a charred envelope. If this gripped you, subscribe to the channel, follow the full story, and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far the truth travels. The night air in Asheville carried a heavy stillness, the kind that makes an old man's bones ache a little deeper. I sat on the porch, staring out across the darkened street, trying to quiet the thoughts that refused to leave me alone. That was when Opal, my neighbor for nearly 30 years, shuffled over with her shawl pulled tight. Her eyes darted nervously before she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lester, that will your son left behind, it isn't real. I heard things I shouldn't have. Someone's been pulling strings." Her words settled over me heavier than the humid night. For a moment, the sound of crickets was the only thing I could hear. My son Daryl had vanished just days earlier, his plane disappearing from radar over the mountains, and now I was being told his will, the very document that determined the fate of everything he'd built, and everything I had hoped would stay within the family, was a forgery. Inside my chest, something twisted, not anger, not yet, just a hollow disbelief. I wanted to ask Opal more, but she glanced back at her house like a woman afraid of being seen. She pressed a folded scrap of paper into my palm. "Don't trust Marla," she whispered, meaning my daughter-in-law. Then she hurried away without another word. The porch light flickered, and for the first time since Daryl's disappearance, I felt truly alone. Marla had been cold since the accident. Speaking of funeral arrangements with the precision of a business transaction, she'd moved quickly, too quickly, insisting the will was valid, that everything was now hers to manage. I had tried to be reasonable, to believe she was simply grieving in her own way, but now suspicion crept in, steady and sharp. That night I barely slept. The old clock in the hallway ticked through the hours while I lay awake replaying Daryl's last voicemail. His voice was tired, almost rushed. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you, but it'll have to wait until I land." He never did, and now a fraudulent will threatened to erase not only his voice but his legacy. Morning brought no comfort. Over breakfast, Marla appeared in the kitchen with a stack of documents. She spoke briskly, almost rehearsed. "The lawyer, Randall Bryce, will be coming by this afternoon to finalize the transfer. It's best we move quickly." I sipped my coffee, hiding the paper Opal had given me inside my shirt pocket. Her words echoed in my mind. "Don't trust Marla." My hands trembled slightly, but I forced them steady against the cup. "Seems fast," I said. My voice, though calm, carried a weight she noticed. Marla's eyes narrowed. "We don't have the luxury of time. Lester, these matters need to be settled." It was in that moment I realized she wasn't grieving. She was maneuvering, and if what Opal had whispered was true, then I was about to be cornered in my own home by a woman who saw me not as family, but as an obstacle. The knock came at 3 sharp raps. Randall Bryce, the family lawyer, stepped inside with his leather briefcase and a smile too polished for a man visiting a house in mourning. His handshake lingered on Marla's, his eyes sliding past me like I was an afterthought. As papers spread across the table, I stayed silent, letting them believe I was the frail old man they thought I had become. But inside, something steadier was waking up. I'd spent nearly 8 decades surviving loss, hardship, betrayal. This would not be the battle that broke me. When Randall slid the supposed will toward me, his pen tapping the signature line, I didn't move to sign. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, watching both of them carefully. "Strange thing," I said softly. "Daryl called me the day before that flight. He said he had something important to share, something that couldn't wait. He never got the chance, but I did." Their faces shifted, ever so slightly, and I knew I wasn't wrong to doubt. The fight for my son's legacy had only just begun. The morning after the news of Daryl's plane going down, the house carried a silence so heavy it pressed into every corner. The refrigerator's low hum was the only sound, and even that seemed to echo too loudly in the emptiness. The old clock on the wall ticked with a kind of defiance, measuring out minutes that felt weightless and hollow. Stepping outside, the cool Asheville air greeted me with the faint smell of damp leaves. The neighborhood was unusually still, as if the world itself hesitated to move forward without my son. That's when Opal Henders, my neighbor of 30 years, shuffled up the walkway. Her eyes darted left and right before she leaned closer. "Lester, that Will Marla keeps talking about, it isn't real," she whispered. The words struck like ice water poured down the back of my neck. For a moment, her face blurred. I heard only the wind rushing through the maple trees above. Marla's insistence about having everything handled replayed in my mind. What had once sounded like control now rang like a threat. Betrayal wasn't just a possibility anymore. It had a name, a whisper, a beginning. Back inside, the thought refused to leave me. My hands traced the edge of the table where I'd once helped Daryl fix his model airplanes. Memory collided with suspicion, and suddenly, Marla's folder from yesterday burned brighter in my mind. A folder she clutched as though it were a lifeline, but instead of storming to her doorstep, I stayed still. Silence had power. Evelyn used to remind me. Patience is sharper than anger. Lester, you wait, and you'll see who reveals themselves. Her voice lived in my memory, softer now, but steady, so I held back, swallowing words I wanted to spit out. The suspicion grew, but I let it fester in quiet. Sometimes, the smartest strike begins with nothing but watchful eyes. The church smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax, the kind of scent that made grief sharper. At the memorial service, ushers directed people to the pews. When my turn came, I found myself guided to the back. "This section is open, sir," one of them said with polite finality, gesturing to the last row. From where I sat, the casket felt a mile away. I caught snippets of whispers. "Isn't that his father?" one woman murmured. Another voice followed. "Strange he isn't up front with the family." Their words stung sharper than any blade. My role, my very place as Daryl's father, erased with a single seating choice. Eyes stayed forward, but inside, humiliation pulsed. A father relegated to the margins at his own son's farewell, stripped of the authority I once carried like a mantle. Then Marla rose. Her black dress clung neatly, her voice practiced and strong. "Daryl would want us to remember him not with sorrow, but with purpose," she declared, holding herself like a widow of honor. Every eye turned toward her, soaking in the story she painted. From the back, I watched in silence. She didn't stumble, didn't break. It was as though she had rehearsed her grief, every word calculated. I could feel the crowd nodding, falling into her narrative, and I realized something chilling. Marla was not only rewriting Daryl's story, she was erasing me from it. Each sentence placed her closer to my son's legacy, while I became nothing more than a shadow on the edge of the room. Anger built, hot and restless, but stayed locked beneath my ribs. Not yet. When the hymns ended, I rose slowly, the cane at my side steadying me. The urge to speak, to reclaim my son's memory, pushed me forward. My voice barely reached the first syllable before Marla's hand lifted. "Dad, please," she said firmly, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "You need to sit. This isn't the time." Dozens of eyes turned. Murmurs rippled through the pews. I felt stripped, as though every layer of dignity had been peeled away under their stares. With legs heavy as stone, I lowered myself back down. On the surface, compliance. Inside, a vow sharper than any oath. I will not be erased. The service ended. Outside, autumn leaves skittered across the pavement, scraping like dry bones. I spotted Randall Bryce, our longtime family lawyer, leaving quietly with Marla. Their shoulders leaned close, smiles faint but certain. Opal's whisper replayed in my head. The folder, the will, the humiliation. As I watched them vanish into the parking lot, the decision formed. Tonight, silence would be my shield and my weapon. The evening air after the memorial felt thick, as though grief itself clung to every branch and shutter. Quiet pressed down on the street when I stepped outside, the kind of quiet that sharpens the ears. Opal's whisper still echoed. Her words about the will gnawed at me, a shadow I couldn't shake. At the end of the driveway, Marla's figure stood beneath the porch light, close beside Randall Bryce. Their heads leaned toward one another, voices low, cautious. I lingered in the dark, letting the silence wrap around me like a shield. "Papers finalized," Bryce murmured. The word papers pricked the air like a thorn. Marla nodded quickly, her expression half hidden, but the faint curve of a smile told more than her lips dared speak aloud. Heat surged through my chest, not mourning, not even grieving, scheming. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt, as if Daryl's absence had become their opportunity. The image wouldn't leave my mind when I turned back toward the porch. Opal's whisper, the folder Marla clutched days earlier. And now this! Talk of papers with Bryce under the cloak of night. Threads of betrayal weaving themselves into something undeniable. Daryl had never been careless. He valued honesty the way other men valued gold. Whatever will he left, it would have been true. Yet here was my daughter, conspiring with a man whose handshake had always felt slippery. Anger rose, sharp and hot, but Evelyn's voice drifted back from memory. Patience before striking. Watch before you move. She'd lived by that. Steady as stone. If she were here, she'd tell me to hold. I gripped the railing, chest heavy. Each breath measured, each thought sharpened. The choice was clear. Stay silent. Watch. Endure. The storm was only beginning. The railing under my hand blurred. A sudden rush filled my head, as though the world had narrowed to a tunnel. The porch steps swam before me, each board wavering. A jolt struck through my skull. My knees buckled. The ground came up too quickly. Somewhere above, voices. "He's down," Bryce muttered. Then Marla's tone, sharp, impatient. "He's just an old man. Randall, he'll be fine." Old man. The words cut deeper than the dizziness. Not father, not grieving parent, just a burden sprawled across the porch like discarded furniture. I tried to rise, hands searching for grip, but my body betrayed me. Weakness spread like a slow poison. Swallowing pride, swallowing strength. White walls met me next. The faint antiseptic tang of a small clinic. A nurse barely older than Clara glanced at my chart, her pen scratching carelessly. "It's stress," she said with a shrug. "And age, rest, fluids. You'll be all right." Her words stacked upon Marla's dismissal, brick upon brick, building a prison of condescension. Stress and age, a neat little box to stuff me in. Inside, resistance flared. They saw me as fragile, but I had weathered wars of life they couldn't imagine. They had no idea what it cost to hold a family together when grief tore it apart. A burden? No, not yet. Not ever. Later. Clara slipped into the room. Her voice was soft, but her eyes blazed with the fire Evelyn once carried. "Grandpa, don't let them do this to you. You're stronger than they think." Her hand found mine, steady and sure. In that moment, my chest lifted, the weight of humiliation thinning like fog at dawn. They thought age made me brittle. They thought frailty would silence me. But every year had carved lessons into my bones, lessons they had never learned. Clara's words planted a seed. They would learn. Age wasn't weakness. Age was an arsenal they'd underestimated. Night closed in around the house when I returned. Restlessness throbbed through me, stronger than pain. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Bryce's phrase looped endlessly. Papers finalized. Opal's whisper threaded through again. Marla's folder. Their smiles. If Daryl's will was forged, I breathed into the dark, voice barely audible even to myself. I'll prove it, even if it kills me. Resolve burned hotter than the humiliation, stronger than the dizziness. It was no longer grief alone that kept me awake. It was war, and as dawn threatened on the horizon, Clara's trembling voice returned to me from memory, a bridge to what awaited. Grandpa, I saw something you need to know. The morning air carried a chill sharper than usual, though maybe it was just the unease that had settled in my chest. Clara stood in the doorway of my study, eyes darting as if someone might be listening from the shadows. Her small hands twisted together before she whispered, almost trembling, "Grandpa, last night, I saw Marla. She wasn't alone. Randall Bryce was with her. They had papers. Looked official. They were whispering like they didn't want anyone to hear." A heavy silence filled the room. I tried to steady her by resting a hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing telling me," I said gently. "But you mustn't say a word to anyone else. Not yet." She nodded quickly, though fear lingered in her eyes. Watching her courage stirred pride, but it also struck a deep fear. If Marla suspected Clara knew anything, the girl might become a target of her cold schemes. Later, sitting alone. Marla's words at the clinic replayed in my head, how she brushed aside my collapse like I was little more than a nuisance. Now, with Clara's account, there was no mistaking it. This wasn't grief guiding her steps. It was calculation. I remembered Evelyn's voice, her calm wisdom reminding me, patience first, then strength. A man who rushes headlong into a fight loses the battle before it begins. I began sketching questions in my mind, small prods to see how Marla might react. It was time to plant doubt in her heart, that I was no longer the blind old man she believed me to be. The next morning at breakfast, the clink of silverware seemed louder than usual. Marla sat across from me, her black dress perfectly pressed, her face wearing grief like a mask. I let the silence stretch, then leaned forward casually. "Marla," I said, my voice calm. "You've mentioned handling some of Daryl's affairs. Just curious. Is everything in order?" She pressed her lips together, eyes lowering for effect. "Everything's handled, Dad. You don't need to burden yourself with it." I set my fork down, meeting her gaze. "Daryl trusted me with his life. Don't think I won't protect his legacy." My words carried no anger, only steel. For the first time, her smile faltered. Randall Bryce, who had been quietly buttering a roll, jumped in quickly. "These are just routine matters. Nothing to trouble yourself about, Lester." His laugh was forced, too quick, like someone who wanted to end the conversation before it even began. Marla's eyes flashed with irritation, and for a heartbeat her grief mask cracked, replaced with something sharper, more dangerous. She recovered, but I had already seen it. Randall's nervous glance sealed it. The two of them were tangled together in something rotten. Outwardly, I sipped my coffee, as if the moment meant little. Inside, I marked it as the first battle won, not in words, but in what they revealed when pressed. That afternoon, I found myself in the quiet of my study. Evelyn's letters, yellowed with time, sat neatly bundled in a drawer. My hands shook as I unfolded one, her familiar handwriting flowing across the page. In it, she had written of her doubts long ago, how Marla's ambition worried her, how she feared our son might not see through it. I had dismissed those worries then, eager to believe the best. Now the echo of her caution struck me like a bell. Grief pressed down, but so did clarity. "I failed to listen before," I whispered into the empty room. "I won't fail again." As night settled over the house, Clara appeared once more at the threshold, her small figure trembling. She clutched something behind her back, and her voice was no louder than a breath. "Grandpa, I think I found one of Dad's real letters. It doesn't look like the ones Marla showed." The words froze me where I sat. My heart pounded as I reached for the envelope in her hand. The paper felt fragile, yet it carried a weight that could tilt the ground beneath us all. This was it, the first shard of truth breaking through the fog. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. Clara's small hands trembled as she passed it to me, her eyes wide as if she were carrying contraband. When the flap tore open, the familiar scrawl of my son's handwriting filled the page. Daryl's words cut through the haze of grief like a blade. He spoke of keeping his assets in trust for Clara, protecting her future, ensuring she would never feel abandoned. His tone was steady, purposeful. Nothing in those lines hinted at giving everything over to Marla. A chill coursed through me. The folder Marla paraded around, the smug way she insisted on settling affairs. All of it suddenly reeked of deceit. My fingers pressed harder into the paper until they shook. Betrayal was no longer a suspicion whispered by a neighbor. It was ink on a page. My son's hand declaring truth. Clara's voice broke the silence. "Grandpa, this means she's lying, doesn't it?" A lump rose in my throat. I wanted to spare her the ugliness, but I could no longer hide it. "Yes, sweetheart," I murmured, folding the letter carefully. "And we'll make sure she never gets away with it." Later, sitting in the dim light of my study, Daryl's words echoed in my mind. Evelyn had once warned me about Marla's ambition, how cold calculation simmered beneath her polished smiles. I brushed it aside back then, hoping love would soften her edges. Now Evelyn's absence weighed heavier than ever, her voice alive only in memory. I traced the lines of Daryl's letter with my finger. "I let you down once, son." The words slipped out before I could stop them. "I won't let her erase you." Clara leaned against my shoulder, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "Don't give up, Grandpa. You're all I have left." Her plea hardened something inside me. Grief burned into resolve. Dinner carried a false calm that evening. The silverware clinked. Randall cleared his throat too often, and Marla wore her widow's mask with precision. My hands shook slightly as I laid Daryl's letter on the table. "Would you like to explain this?" My voice was calm, deliberate. I slid the page across the polished wood until it rested in front of her plate. Marla's eyes darted to Randall, then back to the paper. The mask cracked for just a second. Panic, sharp and unguarded. Randall stammered, This can't be. It's his handwriting." I cut in, leaning forward. "And it tells a story very different from yours. Care to reconcile the two?" The air thickened. Guests shifted uncomfortably. Marla pressed her lips into a thin line, her composure slipping. Her response exploded like glass shattering. "This is a forgery," she snapped, rising from her chair. "You'll go to any length to cling to power, won't you? Even fabricating evidence?" The fury in her eyes only confirmed the truth. My palm struck the table, rattling the dishes. "I've lived too long to be treated like a fool in my own house. This ends tonight." Gasps rippled around us. Randall tried to calm her, whispering frantically, but her anger boiled over. Silence eventually settled, heavy and suffocating. My shoulders sagged with exhaustion, yet beneath the weight was iron resolve. Clara's hand slipped into mine under the table, her small squeeze the only reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. They wanted to erase me, erase Daryl, erase the truth. But Evelyn's lessons and Clara's faith anchored me. I knew now that this battle would not be fought in whispers alone. Back in my study, the house eerily quiet. The phone rang. The sound startled me more than it should have. I picked up, expecting another hollow condolence. "Lester," a voice said, low and urgent. "Milton Caro." My grip tightened on the receiver. "I think I know why Daryl's plane went down," he said. "Meet me tomorrow, but don't tell Marla." The line went dead before I could reply. The letter still lay on my desk, Daryl's words echoing louder now, merging with Milton's cryptic warning. This wasn't just about a will, something darker coiled beneath the surface. And I was standing at the edge of it. The night passed without rest. Milton's voice still echoed in my mind, warning me that Daryl's crash was not the accident everyone wanted me to believe. I sat in my study with the single lamp burning low, Daryl's letter clutched in my hand like a relic of faith. The handwriting was his, no doubt. Each stroke pulled me back to Evelyn's steady reminders. Fight for what's right. Lester, don't let silence be your undoing. Those words were the only anchor keeping me upright while dread gnawed at my chest. The floorboards creaked early in the morning. Marla entered without knocking, Randall trailing behind like her shadow. She dropped a thick stack of papers onto my desk. Her voice rang cold. Everything settled. Daryl left it all to me. "These are the legal documents, in case you're still confused." I adjusted my glasses. forcing my trembling fingers to still. The papers were pristine, signatures flowing too perfectly, almost mechanical. My stomach turned. Daryl's writing was rough around the edges, impatient but human. What sat in front of me was clean to the point of lifelessness, a forgery wearing my son's name. You expect me to believe this mockery? The words came harsher than I intended, but they shot out like fire escaping the pit of my chest. Marla's lips curled into a smile so sharp it could cut. You're grieving, confused, maybe senile. The court will see it too. You're not fit to manage anything, Lester. Clara's voice broke in, clear and trembling. Grandpa knows exactly what he's saying. Randall's hand sliced the air. Young lady, this is adult business. Stay out of it. The room pulsed with silence until my pulse broke it. My hand slammed the desk, the sound rattling the framed photo of Daryl beside me. I leaned forward. You may think age has dulled me, but I've lived long enough to spot a wolf in my home, and I promise you, wolves don't rule forever. I didn't wait for their retort. As they left, smug and certain of victory, I slipped Daryl's real letter into the small safe hidden behind the shelf. My heart steadied only when I whispered to Clara, we don't fight them by shouting louder. We fight them by outthinking them. By midday, I sat in the courthouse lobby, waiting for a man I hadn't seen in years. An old colleague, gray now, but his eyes still carried the weight of law. I handed him the forged papers and Daryl's letter. He scanned quickly, then looked at me with something close to pity. These won't hold if we move carefully. The forgery's clear to anyone who knows what to look for, but you'll need patience. Lester. This battle isn't won overnight. Hope flickered in me like a candle in the wind. For a moment, the crushing weight of isolation lifted. Maybe Evelyn's faith in me wasn't misplaced after all. Evening fell when I stepped back into the house. The air felt different, too still, too heavy. My study door hung open, though I remembered locking it. The safe yawned empty. Daryl's letter was gone. Clara gasped behind me, her small hand clutching my sleeve. Grandpa, if they have the letter, what else will they take from us? The walls of my home pressed in. The place that once sheltered my family now tainted with betrayal. It wasn't just paper at stake anymore. This was war, and it had begun inside my own house. The morning began with unease. Strange cars lined the curb outside my house, engines still ticking from the drive. When I stepped into the living room, Randall was already there, his smug expression plastered across his face like a mask. Beside him stood two people I had never seen before. He introduced them as witnesses, and before I could even ask what they were doing in my home, one of them launched into a rehearsed tale about how I had trouble remembering names and got lost in conversations. Clara snapped back, her voice sharp with outrage. That's a lie! Grandpa is sharper than either of you! But Marla cut in with her polished tone, eyes glittering with victory. See? He's not fit to contest anything. This is exactly why Daryl trusted me to handle everything. The room spun with the weight of their deceit. I clenched my jaw, refusing to rise to the bait. Let them think they had rattled me. Observing quietly gave me more than shouting ever could. I noted every word, every glance exchanged between them, filing it away for the battle ahead. By midday, I was walking the cold corridors of the courthouse. Randall filed his motions with the confidence of a man who believed the system bent to his will. The papers accused me of declining capacity, of being confused and unfit to manage legal affairs. I could feel the whispers ripple through the people waiting nearby. Strangers' eyes slid over me with pity, curiosity, even judgment. My dignity, built over a lifetime of labor and sacrifice, felt like it was slipping through my fingers in a matter of minutes. Every stare felt like a knife. I wanted to shout that it was lies, that my son's memory was being desecrated, but the courthouse walls swallowed my words. I walked slowly, shoulders heavy, feeling Evelyn's absence like a fresh wound. Later that afternoon, I found myself in Randall's office. The blinds were drawn tight, the air stale with power and arrogance. Marla stood close, her perfume sharp, her eyes locked on mine with predatory focus. "You're yesterday's man," she hissed, her words cutting with calculated cruelty. Sign the release. Save yourself the humiliation. Otherwise, we'll drag you through every court in this state as the senile fool you are. Randall leaned back in his chair, silent but satisfied, letting her voice pierce deeper than any gavel. I steadied my breathing. Fury clawed at my chest, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. In that suffocating office, I summoned every ounce of Evelyn's strength that lingered inside me. I looked straight at Marla, voice calm but edged with steel. I built this family's foundation, I said, every syllable measured. The roof you sit under, the ground you walk on, it all came from these hands. You'll choke on your lies before I surrender to them. For the first time, her smile cracked. Randall shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting away as if my words had unsettled the script he thought was ironclad. They had expected weakness, not defiance. Clara's hand brushed mine as we left, a silent affirmation that I hadn't fought alone. The rest of the day carried a heavy silence. I sat in the living room as the sun set, shadows climbing the walls. Marla and Randall had thrown every humiliation at me, but something inside had shifted. I hadn't bowed. Clara whispered, almost reverently, "You didn't break, Grandpa. That's what matters." Her words gave me a strange kind of peace. Alone in my room, I stared at Evelyn's picture. "I won't let them bury me before my time," I murmured. That night, just as I was settling into uneasy rest, a knock rattled the front door. When I opened it, Opal Henders stood trembling on the porch, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. Her voice was low, almost a whisper carried on fear. "Lester, I saw Randall sneaking into your study last night. He wasn't alone." My chest tightened, the air heavy with dread. If they weren't just forging papers but slipping into my home under cover of night, then this was no longer just a fight over inheritance. It was war, and the battleground had shifted into the heart of my own house. The house didn't feel like my own that morning. Relatives I hadn't seen in years poured into the living room, summoned by Marla under the pretense of a family meeting. I stood by the fireplace, watching them take their seats as if they were jury members waiting for a trial. Clara clung to my arm, her grip trembling. She whispered, "Don't let them break you, Grandpa." The air was heavy with suspicion. Marla swept into the room as though she were the hostess of the hour, Randall at her side and Silas Boone close behind. Silas gave me a quick glance, then crossed the room to sit squarely in Marla's corner. His loyalty made clear. Marla rose first, her voice polished and cutting. "We're here because Lester continues to deny Daryl's wishes. He's clinging to fantasies, spreading lies, and confusing the family." With a dramatic motion, she produced the forged documents, holding them high for everyone to see. Silas backed her up immediately. "Look, Lester's not the man he once was. He can't handle the estate at his age. Daryl trusted Marla, and we need to accept that." The room murmured in uneasy agreement. My chest tightened. Authority that had once been mine was slipping away, swallowed by Marla's performance and Silas's betrayal. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, a cousin interrupted. "Lester, people are saying your memory isn't what it used to be. How can you keep track of complicated matters like this?" Their words stung more than I expected. Clara's voice cut through, fierce and protective. "My grandfather is sharper than any of you. He's the only one here thinking clearly." Marla turned her gaze toward her, mocking. "Naive child. You don't understand adult matters." "Stay out of this." Humiliation surged in me. Not for myself, but for Clara, the one person still brave enough to stand at my side. Then, a tremor in the air. Opal Henders, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, rose to her feet. Her hands shook, but her voice carried steady resolve. "I can't stay silent any longer." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. "I have security cameras outside my house. The night Lester's letter went missing, Randall Bryce was in his study. I saw it myself." Gasps rippled through the room. All eyes snapped to Randall, whose face flushed crimson. His mouth opened, then closed again, words stumbling into silence. Marla's smile cracked, the confident mask slipping from her face. I stepped forward, seizing the moment. You wanted a family meeting. Here's your truth. The lies are yours, not mine. The room's energy shifted. Doubt flickered across faces that had been so sure minutes earlier. Even Silas looked unsettled, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. But Marla recovered quickly. Her eyes narrowed into slits, venom lacing her words. Even if Randall did it, you have nothing. Nothing to prove Daryl's will is fake. She leaned closer, voice low and sharp. And if you don't yield, I'll make sure Clara is taken from you. She doesn't belong in this circus of delusions. Her threat cut deeper than any forged paper, deeper than any humiliation I'd suffered so far. My granddaughter, my last anchor, now dangled in the crosshairs of Marla's ambition. That night, as the house emptied and silence returned, I sat in the dark, Clara's small hand still holding mine. This battle had never just been about Daryl's legacy. It had become a fight for Clara's soul, and I knew I would not, could not, let Marla win. The living room still carried the echoes of Marla's last words, her threat to take Clara from me hanging like smoke after a fire. Faces around the room turned to each other in hushed tones, some avoiding my eyes, others filled with doubt. It wasn't just property or papers anymore. She had gone after the only piece of my son I had left. The weight in my chest grew heavier with each whisper. Clara's hand gripped mine tightly, her small fingers trembling. I could feel her fear, and it mirrored my own. For a moment, grief washed over me, not just for Daryl but for the family I no longer recognized. The storm outside pressed against the windows, clouds darkening as though nature itself sensed what was about to break. Marla stepped closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood like hammers on nails. "On what grounds?" I asked her, my voice low but steady. She smiled coldly. "On the grounds of your age, your decline. Everyone here sees it. You collapse. You rant about conspiracies. And you cling to that girl as if she's your last lifeline." "You're unfit, Lester," Randall nodded along, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Silas added his own venom. "It's time you faced reality. You're not capable of raising a child, let alone handling Daryl's estate." Each word chipped away at my dignity, but I refused to bow. "You speak of reality as though you own it, but reality isn't forged on paper or whispered in shadows. Reality is truth, and I still stand for it." My voice wavered despite my effort. The room spun as relatives murmured, doubt clinging to their faces. Clara clung to me, tears streaking down her cheeks. "She's my family," I said, pointing at Clara. "You won't use her as a pawn in your schemes." Marla yanked Clara's arm roughly, pulling her to her side. Clara stumbled, crying out in fear. Rage surged inside me, a heat so strong I nearly lost control. My body shook, but not from weakness. This was fury, restrained by the thin thread of my late wife's voice echoing in memory. Patience before striking. Then Clara's voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. "I heard you. You said Dad's letter was gone for good." The room froze. Every head turned. Marla's smile faltered, her hand tightening on Clara's shoulder. "You're imagining things, child," she hissed. But the mask had slipped. Randall looked pale, his gaze darting anywhere but at me. The crowd's whispers shifted, suspicion now crawling toward them. I straightened, my voice sharp and clear. "Then deny it, Marla. Deny it here, in front of this family, and swear it on Daryl's memory." She sneered, but her hesitation spoke louder than any denial. The balance of the room shifted. The very people who once doubted me now eyed her with unease. For the first time in weeks, I felt the scales tip, if only slightly, toward truth. The storm outside grew louder. Rain pounded the roof as thunder rolled. Marla released Clara's shoulder, her face twisted with fury. "This isn't over," she snapped. "The courts will listen to me, not an old man clinging to ghosts." She turned sharply, storming out with Randall and Silas trailing behind. The room slowly emptied, the murmurs leaving behind only silence. Clara rushed back to me, burying her face against my chest. My arms wrapped around her, a shield against everything outside those walls. Later, I stepped onto the porch with Clara still holding my hand. The air was heavy, rain misting against our faces. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the trembling fear in her eyes. I bent down, whispering into her ear, "Your father would never forgive me if I lost you." The thunder answered for both of us, rumbling across the valley. The fight had spilled beyond family whispers. It was heading into courtrooms and public arenas where truth and lies would collide. The battle for Daryl's legacy and Clara's soul was only beginning. The courthouse in Asheville had never felt so heavy. Its stone walls seemed to hum with whispers, carried along by curious onlookers who had gathered in the corridors just to watch the Vaughn family unravel in public. Every step toward that hearing room felt like trudging into quicksand, but Clara's small hand clasped in mine kept me steady. She whispered, "You can do this, Grandpa." And though her voice trembled, it pushed a little steel into my spine. Inside, the air was thick with perfume, cologne, and judgment. Marla swept in moments later, Randall at her side, both dressed like they were walking into a boardroom rather than a hearing about family and legacy. She carried herself as if she had already won, smiling at anyone who dared meet her gaze. I sat stiffly at the wooden table, keeping Daryl's real letter tucked close, my last lifeline. Marla wasted no time. Her attorney rose and spoke in smooth tones, painting me as an aging widower, prone to confusion, incapable of managing complex affairs or the welfare of a minor child. My knuckles tightened against the table. She wanted to strip me of my dignity in front of the whole town. Across the room, Silas nodded along, feeding her narrative. I lowered my gaze to keep from exploding too soon. When Randall took the stand, he spoke with practiced ease at first. "Mr. Vaughn has shown signs of paranoia," he claimed, his voice steady. "He's not fit to oversee an estate this size." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. But then, under cross-examination, the attorney asked one simple question. "Mr. Bryce, have you ever heard of a second will?" A flicker crossed Randall's face, too quick for most, but I saw it. His words stumbled. I knew Daryl had been drafting something else, but it was never filed." Gasps rippled through the room. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Marla's head snapped toward him, her glare sharp enough to cut glass. Randall swallowed hard, trying to backtrack, but the damage was done. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Explain what you mean by something else," Randall stammered. "It was just talk, nothing official." I misspoke, but his voice quivered now, the confidence stripped away. My chest swelled with a fleeting moment of vindication. Finally, a crack in their armor. Still, fear gnawed at me, without solid proof. His slip might be brushed aside as nothing more than confusion. I felt Clara's eyes on me, her hope rekindled, and I couldn't bear to let it die again. Then the room shifted. A clerk hurried through the doors, holding a sealed envelope. She whispered to the judge, who broke the wax and scanned the papers inside. His face hardened, and the air grew so taut it felt like a storm pressing down on all of us. He folded the envelope carefully and said, "This evidence cannot be ignored. The court will recess until morning." The gavel's sharp crack echoed like thunder. Outside, the storm had arrived for real. Rain poured in sheets. Thunder rolled across the mountains. Clara and I stepped into it, the courthouse lights glowing behind us. She gripped my hand tighter than ever. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "What if it's from Dad?" Lightning streaked across the sky. My throat tightened, but I managed to whisper back, "Then everything changes." The courthouse felt heavier that morning, as though the very walls carried the weight of secrets waiting to be spoken aloud. I arrived early, needing time to steady myself before the hearing resumed. Clara walked beside me, her small hand wrapped tightly around mine. Every whisper we passed in the corridor sounded like a judgment, neighbors and strangers alike savoring the scandal of our family torn apart. Across the hall, Marla leaned close to Randall, her lips moving quickly, eyes darting in my direction. Whatever poise she had carried yesterday seemed cracked now. She looked rattled, almost frantic, though she masked it behind her sharp suit and clipped words. For the first time, it wasn't only me trembling at what might come next. The judge entered with unusual gravity, the bailiff following close behind. No opening remarks, no pleasantries. He gestured for the clerk to step forward with the envelope that had halted the proceedings the day before. A hush fell over the room as the seal was broken. The clerk carefully laid out fragments on the bench, edges curled and blackened, the faint smell of smoke rising as though the fire that had licked them still lingered. A collective gasp rippled across the gallery. The handwriting was clear enough, even in its ruined state. I recognized the loops of Daryl's penmanship instantly. My chest tightened. Memories flooded back. The winter evening years ago when he sat by the fireplace, pen scratching across paper, determination in his eyes. Seeing the charred remnants now felt like watching his hand reach out of the grave, begging not to be silenced. Anger flared through my grief. Someone had tried to erase him, to burn his words out of existence. Not just lies forged in neat black ink. This was destruction, deliberate and cruel. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the rail in front of me, rage trembling through every bone. The judge called for expert testimony. Analysts confirmed what my heart already knew. The fragments were genuine, the ink and paper consistent with Daryl's handwriting, but the relief was short-lived. Large sections were gone. Entire clauses burned to ash, and the most crucial line, the one Daryl once promised me would secure Clara's future, was missing, destroyed beyond recognition. Suspicion hung thick in the courtroom air, the truth dangling just out of reach. Marla's voice rang sharp, breaking the tension. "This is absurd! Anyone could have planted those scraps." She turned to the judge, eyes narrowing. She jabbed a finger toward me. "He's desperate enough to fake evidence, to smear me in front of the court." I rose slowly, every muscle aching but steady. "I didn't even know this existed," I said, voice trembling but firm. "But I know my son's hand. That was Daryl, not me, and someone wanted it burned." Clara clutched the locket at her neck, leaning close enough for only me to hear. "Grandpa, this means Daddy wanted you." Her whisper cracked something inside me, a mixture of sorrow and pride swelling, until I thought I might collapse under the weight. The judge rapped his gavel, silencing the uproar. "This evidence cannot be ignored. We will subpoena every draft, every record connected to Mr. Daryl Vaughn's estate. Court is adjourned until further notice." As the room emptied, I sat frozen, staring at the ashes of my son's last wishes. Vindication and despair wrestled in my chest, proof that Daryl had chosen differently, yet powerless fragments that might never hold in court. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a damp chill clinging to the air. Clara walked beside me in silence, but before we reached the steps, a man brushed past, pressing something into my palm. A folded note. I opened it with unsteady fingers. "Meet me at the old sawmill tonight. I know who burned the will." The paper felt heavier than it should, as though the truth itself had been handed to me. My pulse quickened. If this stranger truly knew who had set fire to Daryl's words, then the path ahead was darker and far more dangerous than I'd imagined. The sawmill loomed at the edge of the woods like a skeleton of another age, its beams creaking in the night wind. The faint smell of oil and sawdust lingered, mixed with damp earth. Every step I took crunched against gravel, and each sound seemed too loud in the emptiness. My hands shook as I clutched the lantern, the thought flickering that maybe this was a trap laid by Marla or Randall. Still, I pressed forward, because silence had become my only shield, and tonight, I prayed it would become my weapon. From the shadows, a voice spoke my name. My heart stuttered before recognition settled. Milton Caro stepped into the lantern glow. Older now, but with the same steady eyes I remembered from the days he and Daryl ran the mill together. "You came," he said quietly, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile air around us. I felt relief and suspicion intertwine. "Why now, Milton?" I asked, my voice raw. He glanced at the ground. "Because they crossed a line too far, and Clara deserves the truth." He pulled a battered recorder from his coat pocket and pressed play. My chest tightened as Marla's voice hissed through the static. Once it's Ash, Lester won't have a word to stand on. Randall's reply was colder still. Then the fight is over before it begins. The sound of fire crackling followed, sealing the horror of what they'd done. My knees nearly buckled, fury surging so hot I could taste it. Milton laid a hand on my arm. I couldn't let them finish it. I saved a copy, and this. From his bag, he drew a sealed folder. Inside was Daryl's intact draft will, edges stained with smoke but otherwise whole. The handwriting was my son's, flowing and familiar, like he was speaking across the grave. Tears blurred the page. I saw Daryl again, bent over the kitchen table one winter. Evelyn teasing him for smudging ink with his sleeve. He had chosen trust, chosen Clara, chosen me. My grief broke open, but in its center was a sharp core of purpose. They tried to erase my son, but he had written himself into permanence. I swore silently I would not let that ink, or his honor, be buried in ashes. Morning came too soon, and the courthouse brimmed with small-town gossip. Marla strode in, Randall trailing close, both confident still, but when Milton took the stand and pressed play, the room gasped. The recording filled every corner with their own treachery. Faces turned toward them, whispers darting like arrows. Then came the final blow, Milton handing the intact draft will to the judge. The gavel slammed, the sound sharp as thunder, fraud, indictment. Their empire of lies cracked in an instant. Clara sobbed into my sleeve, clutching me as though I had been pulled from a grave myself. "Daddy trusted you, Grandpa," she whispered. My chest swelled, not with pride, but with the weight of keeping that trust alive. After the storm of voices and verdicts, I stepped outside into an autumn sky breaking open with light. The air carried the scent of wet leaves, sharp and clean. Evelyn's words came back from her letters. Love is the only inheritance worth fighting for. Property could burn, signatures could be forged, but love and honor stayed written in the heart. I looked at Clara beside me, her hand in mine, and I knew Daryl's name would live on untainted. To those who still whisper that old men are fragile, I say this: I was bent, but never broken. We spend lifetimes building trust and love. Paper can turn to ash, but truth cannot. Guard your family with honor, or you'll leave them nothing but ashes.